I'm asked a question quite often. What's the difference between an instructional designer, an instructional developer, or a programmer? And I get asked this question a lot by new people in the field or people interested in my program. They're kind of curious about, what's the difference between each and what job function should I go to and where do I fit? Or maybe I don't like technology. Do I still fit into the program? Or maybe I really like technology and, where do I fit in? And what are the differences between these things and what are the job prospects of each of them? So let me kind of just explain a little bit about the differences and then the job prospects. So first of all, the instructional designer basically is the person who does all of the analysis, figures out how to design the curriculum, designs it, creates storyboards, may use an authoring tool or not. And by authoring tool, I mean something very simple to develop in, not much harder than PowerPoint to develop it. It goes through the whole entire instructional design process. That's the average instructional design job. I don't expect an instructional designer to be a programmer. That's computer science. That's not what I expect an instructional designer to do. I don't expect an instructional designer to really be an expert in video either, or be an expert and be able to use something complicated like Adobe Animate. I expect an instructional designer to be able to use simple software like Articulate, Captivate, PowerPoint, maybe develop it in LMS. That's the basic instructional design job. Now, an instructional developer goes a step further than that. An instructional developer, I look at more of a multimedia developer job. I look at someone who is going to be, pretty competent in Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator, enough to develop images. Someone who can use software more complicated than Articulate and Captivate, like probably can design websites, using HTML and CSS, and knows how to install, a website onto a server, and can do basic things like that. Now I don't really expect this person to be the programmer. The programmer is someone who's going to write in all code using some kind of object-oriented language like JavaScript or Java, or develop mobile apps using Apple's Xcode or something like that. That's what I think of as the programmer. The programmer is a computer science major. That's not what you learn in instructional design. I do teach an intro to programming class, but it's basic HTML, CSS, intro to object-oriented program, very basic level. Instructional designers are not programmers. They're way two different jobs, very two, functions and roles, but there's a lot of similarities between us. They study design, we study a little bit of programming. So there's, that huge connection between us, but we're not the same. And that instructional developer almost fits in as like a middleman, but it's closer to the instructional designer because it's more of a multimedia person who understands instructional design, because that instructional developer does need to understand instructional design. So let's talk jobs. As far as like getting out, starting salaries, I think that they're pretty much on par with one another. So as far as like what you enjoy and what you like, you need to go into the one field of those three that you really, really, really enjoy and, see yourself having fun in. Because, you always want your job to be as enjoying as possible. As far as like salary goes, all three of those are going to be very, very, very similar. Now, I will say, having worked in large companies, that the instructional designer who starts to work their way up in management has a better opportunity for salary. They have a much easier chance to get in a management position. And then once you're in management, your salary can go up exponentially. So I think, I've worked with, at least in large companies, in all three of those capacities and with all three of those groups. And I will tell you that the people who became the managers, who managed the programming team, who managed the developers, were the instructional designers, were the trainers, because we were the ones always involved in the front end analysis, who more or less would be involved in project planning, which is why we were involved in project management, which is why we were promoted to project managers. So, from my experience, if your concern is salary, I'd say that's the direction to go. But none of the three have bad salaries to begin with. If you want to get into management, I would say instructional design is the way to go. But that's really the difference between those three and where they all fit in to the niche of our field. Thank you.